think on the railway safety thing, I mean, look, I think we're going to get that bill is going to pass. I think we may even get a majority of Republicans behind it. But I do think that there was this sort of knee-jerk reaction when we started talking about railway safety to say, is any regulation of the railroad industry consistent with sort of a free market approach to the economy? And my immediate pushback to that was, well, what the hell are you talking about? Free market railroads? Really? These guys just got bailed out of a labor dispute by the federal government 3 months ago. And you guys want to now pretend that they're sort of this libertarian ideal of a private company? And oh, by the way that they went about this, and this is something, Saurabh knows well, some of you know well, I can be a very petty person. And when the railroad lobby started going after not just me, but after my staff, I got very pissed off about that. And I frankly think the bill is going to be worse, and we're going to get more Republicans on it purely because they decided to go after my staff instead of going after the substantive disagreements, some of which are very reasonable. Like, I'm not saying, I'm not committed to anything that I do being perfect. So I'm certainly willing to have that conversation. So anyway, I think that there is this real sense among the base and among certain leaders, people who are paying attention to what's going on, that the base is not cool with a no give and take alliance with corporate America. They're sick of being used as pawns in a Chamber of Commerce agenda. That's true on defense policy. It's true on immigration. It's true on a lot of things. But a lot of leaders in this town, I think, haven't quite caught up. I will say, the good thing, the optimistic take on this is, if you look at the strongest pushback on the Railway Safety Act, it has largely come from the industry lobby and from organizations that don't have a lot of influence in the movement. Okay. If you were to rank the 10 most influential conservatives in this town from a movement perspective, not a single one of them has pushed back on the piece of legislation. So I think there's a broad recognition. The party's moving. I don't think that you want to, move for the sake of moving, but I think there are certain issues where we have to recognize major multinational corporations are not always aligned with the national interest. That is a fact of life. And if you're not willing to deal with it, I don't think you're willing to do serious policymaking in this town.
Railroad companies don't get to nuke small towns in Ohio and get away with it. This East Palestine thing has been fascinating at a certain level because I can't think of an example in recent history where a freshman senator representing this ideologically heterodox movement was thrown into the limelight 2 months into being a U.S. senator newly inaugurated. What has that experience been? Do you feel like you've had to play catch up faster than you expected? And how quickly have you had to get your reps in actually legislating? You have the Railway Safety Act, which is a great piece of legislation that might address some of these issues. What are some of the challenges and reflections on this process been?
I mean, I think where it's been toughest is on my staff, right? So if you think the average Senate office, at least for a state the size of Ohio, is about 40 people. I don't know how many people we have. What is it, 20, 25 people in the office right now, give or take? Probably a third of them are here today, actually. Hey, guys, you didn't have to come, by the way.
There's a lot of tall ones.
I wouldn't fire anybody if you didn't come to this thing. But I mean, there's so much to monitor and the situation changes so frequently. So I think for our staff, where they're trying to figure out, where is Russell floor to, and like, where do I walk JD to when he has to go to this meeting, to all of a sudden be thrown into very serious policymaking, I think it definitely required some catch up. I mean, for me, a lot of this is just being visible and being present and making sure you're staying on top of the things you have to stay on top of, right? And I think that was easier for me in part because I just got off the campaign trail. I go to East Palestine, Ohio. So crazy statistics. Somebody told me that they polled in 2018. They polled some Senate race or some governor's race in the state of Ohio, and they looked at statewide name ID of different politicians in the state of Ohio. And of course, John Kasich was highest because he was the sitting governor. Rob Portman, who had just gone through a campaign 2 years earlier, was polling at something like 35% statewide name ID. So that stuff drops off pretty quickly, right? But I was running 4 months ago, right? So I drop in East Palestine. Everybody knows who I am. It was a very heavily Vance territory. And so it was much easier, I think, for me to do what I needed to do. And I think the staff did a great job of just figuring out, okay, what are the things that we need to know? Who do we need to yell at? Who do we need to complain to? What do we need to identify? And that detective work, I think, has required a very quick adjustment from the staff, but I think they've done a good job.
what needs to happen for the people of East Palestine over the next few months and years, and specifically what's the federal role in what needs to happen there?
Yeah, so I'd bucket this into three things: the short-term health, the long-term health, and the long-term economic impact. So short-term health, you still have a mound of dirt in East Palestine that's about 30,000 tons of toxic dirt that they have dug out of the ground that has to go somewhere, okay? And you will never allow the people of East Palestine to live a normal life until that stuff is out of their town. And there's been a lot of resistance to taking it, and the implication is that it should just sit in East Palestine forever. I refuse to accept that. So we've done a lot of work to try to get that stuff moving. I think that we're now finally making a pretty good amount of progress on that. I suspect about a month and a half from now, that cleanup will be completed. But, I've been wrong about this stuff in the past, and we're going to stay on top of it. The second thing is the long-term health impact. So there was this moment, and I won't name the guy, but where a GOP congressman not from the state of Ohio dropped into East Palestine like 5 days after I was first there and said, you should feel safe about the drinking water. The air is fine. The water is fine. Drink the water. Okay. And the thing is, if you actually go to East Palestine and talk to people, like, they're not worried that they're going to take a sip of water and drop dead. What they're worried about is what happens if their grandkids drink the water for the next 10 years. They're going to have weird cancers, okay? And the thing that we've realized, again, this goes to the staff having a pretty steep learning curve, is there is no bureaucracy within the federal government that is designed to answer the question of what do you do with chronic exposure to toxic chemicals. No one can answer that question. Nobody can even tell you how you might go about answering that question. So we commissioned a study from an epidemiologist that I know to try to identify the answer to that question. And that's one thing we're going to have to do over the next 3-4 years, is monitor that. So hopefully we can give people confidence that they have no health problems, or God forbid, if they do have health problems, we at least know where it came from and can get them the care that they need. And then the third thing is, economically, this is a devastating thing for the people of East Palestine. So, I talked to a farmer a couple of weeks ago. She grows hay, but she also raises chickens, mostly for fresh eggs. Okay. Who wants to buy fresh farm eggs from East Palestine right now? Who wants to feed their animals the hay grown on a farm in East Palestine right now? Well, the answer is pretty much nobody. Okay. And what that means, think about the home values. People who've lived in the same house for 40 years, their home was paid off. Now it's worth half what it was worth 2 months ago. The economic devastation, the effect on the tax base, the effect on the local schools is going to be with us for a long time. So we're eventually going to roll out some sort of economic aid package. And I think that's probably the most direct and obvious thing the federal government can do. By the way, on this question of, the free market orthodoxy versus, the people who are challenging that orthodoxy, sometimes I think that this argument is useless to the real facts on the ground, because the railroads, we have allowed them to socialize the costs of doing business on the people of East Palestine and similar communities. If you, as a railroad, have to pay every single cent when your train crashes and you basically set off a chemical bomb in the middle of one of my constituents' hometowns, if you had to pay for that, you would respond to the public safety concerns much differently than the railroads do. But because a lot of that falls on the American taxpayer and the Ohio taxpayer in this case, these railroads, I don't think, conduct business the way that they should. So really, this is about basic fairness. If you're going to cause the problem, you ought to pay for it.